right, guys, happy Friday. Thank you so much for coming and sharing this time with me. I wanted to point out a couple different features of today's Zoom call. The first being that we do have a Q&A section. So if you have questions at any point in time during the webinar, feel free to pop those questions into the Q&A. I'll stop at a couple different points to ask if there are questions, and then we'll also have some time at the end for a Q&A portion. So please, there are no silly questions. So if you have a question, it's likely that someone else does too. So feel free to jump in and just ask. Don't worry about note taking today. One of the things that I like to do whenever I'm doing a webinar is to put together a really detailed resource guide. That'll have a lot of the information that I'm going to share. Some of it's on the slide, some of the information is in exercise form or journaling or things like that that you can do after the fact. So after today's webinar, I'll go ahead and send that out to everyone. So you can sort of take the concepts that we've talked about here today and start to learn and practice and implement them. And with that said, I just want to make sure everybody can see the PowerPoint. So if you could do me a favor and pop into the chat, let me know if you see the landing page of the PowerPoint, and then we'll go ahead and get started. All right, thank you, James Ward. I appreciate you. So just diving right in, the purpose of today really is to just spend some time talking about what I think is sort of at the heart of our core performance. These things, mindset, order, ritual, and energy, which are very, very important to me and have sort of been at the forefront of some of the changes that have happened in my life over the last, let's call it 18 months to 24 months. So I'm gonna dive right in and show you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. First, just very brief sort of overview of my background and the company. And then we'll get right into the meat of the presentation with different aspects of mindset, order, ritual, and energy. And like I mentioned, a Q&A. So moving forward, about us. So I founded a company called CRE Recruiting about a year ago. It is focused on helping all aspects of the commercial real estate industry grow, whether you are a candidate or whether you are a client or a company looking to expand. In this new season with quarantine and the coronavirus, I found that because the pace of hiring has slowed, I've had some extra time on my hands. And what I was thinking was, how can I help the people who are maybe looking for assistance with performance, driven people who want to grow their careers, maybe grow their companies. With CRE Recruiting, I could help people two different times. One, if they were looking for a job, and two, if they were looking to grow their team or their company. And CRE at Work is really all about helping people in the in-between time. So what can you do to take things to the next level? What are some tips and tactics and resources? And so that's what I've been working on during this quarantine period. A little bit about my background, just high level. I've been a recruiter for 10 years. I have been within the commercial real estate industry for 6, but really, really focused on my own personal development and growth heavily for the last, I would say, 3 years or so. So diving in, quick sort of centering thought of the day. I really love this quote by Jim Rohn. One, we have 2 choices. We can make a living or we can design a life. I think a lot of us have spent the last maybe 10 years or more just reacting to the pace of life and everything that's been thrown at us, as opposed to intentionally stopping and pausing and being really, sort of intentional about what we're creating for ourselves. So I think me personally, I'm one of those people who's sort of a compulsive joiner. I say yes to a lot of things. And, pre-COVID, pre-quarantine, I think I had a lot of demands on my time. And one of the benefits of, sort of the pause that we're experiencing while it is very challenging in a number of different respects, is that I've had the time to really evaluate how I'm spending my time and the choices that I've made in terms of, you know, my values, the things that I'm really focusing on. So wanted to share that with you. I'm a big quote person. I hope you like that quote. Jim Rohn has so many great quotes, a leader really in the personal and professional development space. So if you don't know who he is, I would say Google him. And just diving right into the first topic of mindset, I have a couple different, what I would call sort of opposites, 3 different opposites within mindset. And before we dive into those, just wanted to share with you a couple different definitions of mindset. I think, you know, everybody has a different idea potentially of what that means. My favorite definition is at the bottom, and it is how we consistently feel about what we perceive. Our perceptions, right, are colored by our past, maybe our childhood, the way that we grew up, the things that we experienced in sort of our formative years, and that sort of shapes or colors everything with a particular lens. And our mindset is really how we react and feel and respond to that. So I think having control over your mindset, you know, one of the quotes that I love, and I'm not sure the attribution, is you can control 2 things, your attitude and your effort. So mindset is sort of your attitude in this respect. And the first sort of pair of mindset sort of ideas is this growth or fixed mindset concept. So some of you might know there's an author, I think it's Carol or Carolyn Dweck, wrote a book called Mindset. So Google that. It's a really, really good read. And essentially divides people into these 2 different categories, the people who have growth mindsets and the people who have fixed mindsets. A growth mindset essentially, you know, at the heart of it says that I can be successful at anything as long as I put in the work and I put in the time. So I think all of us can probably reflect back to a time in our lives where we were learning something new. You know, maybe it was something that we previously felt that we couldn't do. For me, a silly example of this is knitting. I grew up doing lots of arts and crafts, you know, with my family, and I could do pretty much everything, but I couldn't knit for whatever reason. So I had this story in my head that I just didn't have what it takes to be a knitter, which is sort of hilarious when you say it out loud. So that's an example of a fixed mindset, believing that I just didn't have the skills required. It's related to talent. I can't really control it. You know, there's nothing I can do. I'll never be a knitter. Eventually, I realized that this was a silly belief that I had, that, you know, maybe I just hadn't found the right path to learn how to knit. And so I tried a couple different avenues. I tried, you know, learning online. I went into a yarn store. I sat down with the owner, and she shared with me a couple resources that worked for her. And lo and behold, a lot of the reason that I didn't think I could knit was just related to my mindset. And once I flipped that mindset, and I tried different paths, and I gave myself a break and some grace in terms of my ability to pick things up quickly, I am a knitter. I'm knitting sweaters, and I'm knitting socks and things like that. So growth versus fixed, I think that's a great story that demonstrates that. I want to encourage you, after the call today, part of the resource guide is a journaling prompt based on the things that maybe you've learned in the past, and what demonstrates that you can have a growth mindset, and maybe what are the things that if you weren't worried about failure, if you weren't worried about maybe what people thought, how would you spend your time, and how would you, you know, sort of learn new skills, or what would you learn? So spend some time with that. That's the first pair, I guess, of mindset you know, sort of words. The next is abundance and scarcity. Hopefully these are concepts that you've heard about before, but if you haven't, just really at a high level, people who have abundant mindsets don't look at life like a pie. You know, if we're all sitting around the table and there's a pizza, and I take a slice of pizza, that means that there's one fewer slice for James or Kathy or Shannon. In reality, the world is not limited in this way. There isn't just one slice of pizza or one pizza for all of us. There's more than enough. So people who have abundant mindsets aren't threatened by other people's success or by other people maybe getting a piece of the pie or pizza. I think abundant people are also tend to be, in my mind, more optimistic. They have more self-confidence. They're not worried about resources running out. The inverse of that is scarcity. A lot of our feelings about abundance and scarcity relate to how we grew up. If you grew up in a house where maybe there were not enough resources, there might not have been enough money or food or time, whatever the case might be, I want you to think about abundance and scarcity as resources rather than individual, sort of types of resources like money, like food, like time. And it could have really built in you this fear. And one of the most challenging things I think about quarantine and COVID-19 and sort of this situation and season that we're in is that it brings up a lot of maybe trauma or bad experiences from childhood or earlier in life. And I think that in those instances, we go back to that little girl or that little boy that experienced some of those issues. And it's difficult to operate, from our, sort of core principles or from a self-confident place if we were raised in an environment that was full of scarcity. And today we're sort of thrust back into a situation that brings up and triggers maybe some of those memories and some of that trauma. So really want you to spend some time thinking about abundance and scarcity. One of the prompts in the resource guide is related to gratitude. Gratitude is one of the practices that I use to sort of stay in that abundance mindset. It's something that I do every day. In the morning, I pick out the one thing I'm grateful for that morning. And in the evening, I pick out the 5 things that I've been grateful for throughout the day. And just continuously sort of looking for and thinking about the things that I value and the things that I am grateful for has really sort of shifted that abundance or that mindset more to abundance and away from scarcity. I will tell you that I have, maybe some natural inclination or some, experience with scarcity, not necessarily from like a food or resources standpoint, but the way that I grew up and moving around, I lived 13 different places by the time I was 15. So for me, the idea of, there isn't enough to go around was maybe more so related to, stability, and stability and scarcity, I think are very, very related. So I'm gonna hop in and share with you the last sort of pair that I think about in mindset. And this one is really thinking about whether a situation is happening to you or happening for you. So the people who look at a situation like COVID or the quarantine and think, wow, what can I possibly learn from this situation? There's really no losing here for me if I can take something productive from it and I can move forward with a new maybe sort of set of tools or some additional resilience. What can I really learn from this particular season? I don't know if you guys have heard of Joseph Campbell or the hero's journey. There's also a contemporary teacher, Don Miller, who talks about the different archetypes in a story. And those different archetypes are the hero, the victim, the guide, and, oh shoot, I'm gonna lose this last one. The hero, the victim, the guide, and the villain. So the 2 places that you want to be either the hero or the guide. The hero is the one who takes responsibility, the one who grows through challenges. The guide is the person who helps the hero. So those are the 2 really positive sort of archetypes that you can be. But I think the hero looks at a situation and thinks, how can I overcome? How will this make me better possibly than I was before this happened to me? One of the things that I tell myself when I meet a challenge or am struggling, and there have been a lot of struggles for me personally during this time. My business has changed tremendously just given the fact that a lot of people are not hiring anymore. But the more that I'm able to reframe sort of this season, this situation as happening for my greatest good, there are things about this time that I actually asked for. You know, I can reflect back and think about how often I said, oh, I just wish I had more time to ... I would love to get around to ... And you know what? The universe has a sense of humor, and it delivered in a certain way for me. And, you know, I'm trying to focus on the positives of that. So using this time as productively as possible, helping as many people as possible. And really just showing me, you know, sort of all the things that I have to learn from this. One of the things that I'm learning from this is that you know, there's really not a lot of certainty, and the certainty that does exist, you know, is very limited. So that's one of those things that I'm learning from this particular season. So happening to me is the polar opposite. It's those people who, you know, sort of curse the heavens and say, why me? Why is this happening to me? The idea that life isn't fair, if that's something that pops up in your sort of psyche, you might be struggling with the happening to me mindset. This falls into the victim archetype. It's a place of, you know, sort of powerlessness and not really having power or control over your response. You know, this is bullshit is another sort of, you know, talk track that might be in your mind. And this idea that you don't have agency, you don't have control over your life, or you're somehow at the mercy of fate. Again, back to the, you know, we can control our attitude and our effort. Those are the two things really we can control. The person who thinks that everything is happening to them feels like they have absolutely no control in this system, or in this situation, and thus they have no responsibility, no blame, etc. So those are just some interesting things that I wanted to share with you about mindset. Does anybody have any questions before we dive into order, or the next section? Is this resonating with you guys? Does any of this sound good? Make sense? Do you agree? Disagree? All good. Okay. Thanks, James. I appreciate it. All right. So quick tactics in terms of shifting mindset. I want to talk about a couple of things here before we move on. I forgot this slide was in here. Growth versus fixed. One of the things that you can do is embrace the SFD. The SFD is code for shitty first draft. And this is a concept from Brene Brown, who's one of my favorite teachers. And this is just to say that anytime you do something for the first time, be prepared for it to be a little shitty. Anytime an author writes a book, the first edit, the first draft is always really, really rough. I think a lot of us have this idea that we should come right out of the gates and be fantastic at all things. But really, the more that you can give yourself permission to not be perfect and embrace sort of that shitty first draft, the happier you'll be and the more successful you'll be. Because a lot of people just say, well, if I can't do it perfectly, if I can't do it well, I'm just not going to do it at all. So don't be one of those people. The I'm not good at statements, I think language has a lot of power, and there are studies that show that the more you speak negativity, the more likely it is to actually happen. So don't say those sorts of things out loud. If you're gonna say I'm not good at, you know, counter that with I'm not good at blank yet. I am working on blank. I am learning blank. All the challenges that you have, again, are just opportunities to grow and learn. And two, if you had a friend who was going through a similar situation, like let's say you had a friend who was going back to college to pursue an advanced degree, you would be very kind to that person as maybe they tripped up and stumbled. Treat yourself with the same care and grace that you give to other people. Abundance versus scarcity, we already talked about gratitude. One of the things I think too, if you're trying to counteract maybe some scarcity tendencies that you have in yourself, notice what makes you jealous about other people. I think that's a real clue into, you know, sort of what your hopes and dreams might be, or, you know, where you might be holding yourself back, and celebrate those things in other people. So one of the things that I really appreciate about others is when they demonstrate leadership. So what I can do on a daily basis is celebrate people who are leading, you know, maybe who are posting content that is helpful to others. And that really, I think, is going to help me to embody those things more, that I appreciate in other people. Anytime you have a recurrent sort of pattern, a scarcity sort of mindset, you know, I am not enough, focus on, no, I am enough, and this is why. Give yourself evidence. And if you're finding that a lot of these negative feelings are popping up after social media, which is quite a common sort of response, do an audit. Unfollow the triggering sort of accounts that you look at. Whether it's sort of a negative message, maybe you're overwhelmed with news sources that are not super positive. You know, how you spend your time and the content that you read, all becomes a part of you. So think about, you know, consuming that sort of junk food content, and maybe follow some more uplifting social media accounts. Happening to me versus for me, I think it's a great opportunity for all of us now, as we have some time to take a pause, to reflect on this situation or other situations that we've gone through recently. So as often as you can, when you get through maybe a hard season, a hard experience, to say to yourself, okay, what have I learned, and what am I going to take with me from this particular event, and identify when you see this, when you see these, you know, sort of victim statements or victim tendencies popping up in yourself, recognizing them and neutralizing them. So if the victim is telling you, you know, it's not fair, how can you counteract that, and how can you replace that with a new belief? And two, always thinking for yourself, how can I find the silver lining in this situation? That's one of my favorite questions to ask myself. You know, when I'm feeling upset because California is going to be safer at home for several more weeks and months than I want it to be, what are the silver linings in this situation? One for me is that I have a senior dog who's going through Cushing's disease, which is really sad. And, you know, she's 13 and probably doesn't have a lot of time left. The silver lining for me is that I can be home with her. And that's time I probably wouldn't have, and won't ever be able to give back. So just some quick tips on shifting your mindset. Order is the next. Again, with the definitions, I like to think of order as, you know, sort of putting things in their place, getting an arrangement, something that works for you, you know, so things are logical, and sort of nice and clean and productive. I think there are three things that we want to focus on putting order in. The first is your thoughts. One of the things that I've sort of worked on personally over the last several years is identifying these negative recurring thoughts that I have. So one of those thoughts for me personally has been, I'm going to wind up all alone. And it's a funny sort of thought to say out loud. I think that thought goes back again to growing up and sort of moving all of the time and not really having a lot of consistency in terms of people in my life. But when I have that thought, I'm going to be all alone, to neutralize that thought is simply to turn it away from a negative to a neutral. So that thought would then be, I'm not going to be all alone. Finally, I can turn it into a positive. I have wonderful people in my life, right? It's a huge leap to go from I'm going to be all alone to I have wonderful people in my life. So taking that step in between to neutralize the negative thought just helps you sort of get that belief in the fact that that feeling can change. And it's not such a massive sort of jump from the negative to the positive. You won't necessarily believe, if you're stuck in that negative space, in a positive affirmation unless you go through the process of, well, actually that's not true, and this is what can be true or could be possible for me. You probably have a lot of negative thoughts. kicking around in your brain, and I would encourage you to spend some time thinking about, like, what are the patterns, what are the things that pop up all the time. And maybe it's when, you know, things aren't going so well, you get the, you know, I'm not smart enough, or I'm not strong enough, or I'm not healthy enough. Whatever the limiting belief is, try to neutralize it first, and then try to spin it in a positive way. And every time that thought pops up, have an awareness around it and go through this process again and again. I think it's very helpful. Two other things that really I think help to organize and order thoughts are journaling. And there's so many different opportunities and ways to approach journaling. Morning pages is a concept from the Artist's Way. And it's essentially waking up every day. And I think she says 3 pages. There's actually a book, and I can send you the link to the book, The Artist's Way. But essentially sit down in the morning and don't get up until you write 3 pages. It's free writing. It doesn't necessarily have to have a purpose. But I think, you know, the more you free write and journal, the more you'll sort of uncover maybe what are some of these beliefs and things that have been holding you back. I personally like to journal at night and sort of reflect upon the day and the things that happened and things that, you know, maybe I'm aware of now, you know, sort of sitting back and looking at it, you know, from a few hours ago. Gratitude journaling, obviously, is something I believe in a lot. Guided journaling, I think, is fantastic. Sometimes we stare at a blank page and it's very, very, I don't know, threatening is not the right word, overwhelming. I get overwhelmed sometimes by the blank page. So it's great if somebody has a thought-provoking question that you can answer and use that as sort of the basis for your journaling for the day. Daily reading is another sort of great way to prompt writing. One of the books that I really like, I think it's called The Daily Stoic. It's by Ryan Holiday. Stoicism is a philosophy from ancient Greece and really applicable to today. And so that's a really great book. Every day there's a quote from one of the Stoics, and there's sort of a thought or meditation on it. So meditation has been another thing that's been fantastic for me. I tend to have that sort of monkey brain that's active all the time. Doesn't matter how much I've worked or how late I've stayed up. I sometimes have a hard time, you know, relaxing, falling asleep. I love guided meditation. Sometimes that's visualization, where they're encouraging you to sort of picture an image or a place. Loving kindness meditation is sort of all about sending good energy to, you know, people that you know, people that you don't know. Sound baths, I think, are fantastic, and maybe not an experience that you can have exactly during quarantine, but there's so many different free resources today, especially because of quarantine. So take a look on YouTube, see if you can find anything that resonates for you. And you know, test out a couple different things. I think sometimes, you know, when you're first diving into meditation, it feels very overwhelming. A great first step into meditation can be, you know, some of the apps like Insight Timer that are out there. All right. Your time is another thing where you can sort of enforce some order and some systems. One of the things that I have recently implemented is this concept that Ed Milet talks about called mini days. And the idea is that every one of us has had one of those days where maybe you get more done in 4 or 5 hours than you had in the prior like 2 or 3 days. And so it's just this idea of breaking up your time, giving yourself bouts of sort of intense focus. And the idea is that if you have 3 mini days that are highly focused in one day, it's going to put you, you know, twice as far or 3 times as far ahead of, you know, what is perceived to be your competition. So it's basically just a way to get a leg up. Ed Milet is a beast and does it from 6 a.m. to noon and noon to 6 and 6 to midnight. I just don't have that stamina, and I'm also not a morning person. So I have implemented 8 to noon, noon to 4, and 4 to 8. And I use mini days, and it's not just work for those 3 days, or those 3 mini days. My last mini day includes yoga, it includes walking the dogs and dinner and things like that. So it's just a way to be really intentional about how you're scheduling your time to maximize the impact. Planning ahead, I think, is another really important sort of concept for creating order, especially in this particular time. I am a paper planner person, so I actually have a paper planner that I use. I use that in addition to Outlook. Some people are just electronic people. So whatever works for you, but I do think this idea of really the night before reflecting on what are the biggest 3 things that you need to tackle tomorrow helps you, one, to write it down or put it into your Outlook calendar, because then you aren't having to remember it. I think a lot of our brain waves and a lot of our energy is sort of sucked up by remembering things. So if you can just write it down somewhere, put it in your calendar, you don't have to think about it anymore. It's not taking up any more space in your brain. And it helps you first thing in the morning to sort of center yourself. What's most important to me today? And how am I going to fit that into sort of my schedule? That for me has been very, very impactful. And then this idea of creating transitions. I think one of the things that has been challenging for a lot of people, especially in California, but in other places as well, anywhere that you might have a commute, is that there used to be this time where you went from home to work and maybe you listened to podcasts or a particular radio program. I know I had these sorts of routines for myself. And so now that I don't do that, now that I don't get in the car to go somewhere, what can I do to create a sequence that I know it's telling my brain, okay, we're turning on for the day, it's business time now, it's not Netflix time. How do you sort of tell yourself or signal to yourself through maybe a few step process in the morning and at night, that it's time to go to work and it's time to stop working? I think I've had some schedule creep in that I can't ever get away from the work. My desk is, in my house, and it sort of leads me to sometimes work till all hours of the night. Creating those transitions, and one example that I saw online that somebody was doing that I just loved is that her commute is that she put in her headphones, she put on a podcast that she loves, and then she went and she walked a mile around her house and came back. And so that was her commute. So she had time to sort of mentally prepare herself for sitting down at her desk and tackling her day. And then at the end of the day, she did the same thing. So that's a signal to her brain, like, okay, shut down. We're not thinking about work anymore. We've already put down our big 3 for the next day. And this is sort of the way that we, transition back and forth from work in a period where, things might not seem like they ever end. Last section is environment. Creating separation, I think, is key and crucial and sometimes hard. I live in a studio apartment that has a loft, so a lot of my spaces are dual purpose. But as much as possible, don't do things like eat at your desk. Don't watch Netflix in bed if possible. Watch it from the couch and try to only sleep in bed. Those sorts of things will help to reinforce some of the boundaries that you need to really differentiate between this is an active space, this is a quiet space, and also to reinforce some of those boundaries between your work and your personal time. Values front and center. This is something, and I can show you actually mine. This is the Post-it note that I have on my computer monitor of my values or my operating system. And one, I think a lot of people just don't even spend the time to think about, like, what are your top values, or what are my top values, or how do I want to show up in the world? The reason that I like going through that exercise and having it on your computer screen or in your environment is that it allows you to have it top of mind and present. So if I'm on the phone and I'm having a challenging conversation with someone, and I know that one of my values is kindness and generosity, and I see that Post-it note, that's going to help me to act in accordance with those beliefs and maybe not fly off the handle if the other person is being irrational. Again, it just motivates me to be the person that I want to be, and it reminds me of the intentions that I have set for myself. And I think it's a really positive sort of addition to your environment that a lot of people don't have. Protecting your peace is pretty sort of straightforward. This is not as difficult for me, admittedly, as it might be for others. I don't live with anybody else. I have 2 dogs, so nobody's really playing loud music or interrupting my conference calls, although Juno every once in a while likes to howl. But whatever you can do to give yourself the space, whether it's actual space or just the idea of space and boundaries. One of the things that actually was working for me very well at my co-working space, I have a private office there, but the walls were a little thin and I had a very loud neighbor, was a noise machine, a sound machine. So I have one that's actually like a fan, so it's not a recording. It's moving air through this device, and it really, really helps to cut down on background noise and just to relax me. So that might be something to try. Otherwise, noise canceling headphones are great. You know, I've seen a lot of creative, funny signs online over the last few days. So do whatever you need to do just to give yourself, you know, sort of the space and the separation. All right, I'm going to pause there for a second. Any questions on order or any ideas or things that you want to share that have worked for you? If not, we can move on. All right, so ritual. Oh, thanks, Shannon. I appreciate that. Shannon says fantastic tips. Ritual is something that I really love, and I really have done a lot of work around personally over the last several months, and definitely have changed things due to quarantine. But ritual is essentially acting in an intentional way, you know, to basically accomplish a particular goal or a purpose. So I have rituals that relate to, you know, sort of the start of my day, the end of my day. I want to share with you just some probably pretty obvious points. I think if you go online and you read all of the sort of routines and habits and practices of the most highly successful people in the world, you'll find themes that are in common. And these are some things that I just want you to think about. Some of these things might be things that you do. You know, you might not have any sort of you know, schedule around them, or you might do them sporadically. But a lot of the top performers, the highest achievers, the most successful people, all the superlatives, have really intentional practices built around these things that add value to their lives. One great example of a community that sort of does this and reinforces this idea is the Miracle Morning. I've definitely done that before, not successfully for very long, because as I mentioned, I am not a morning person. But the Miracle Morning community, their acronym is SAVERS. And so every morning they wake up, a lot of them wake up at 4 or 5 in the morning, and they do, I think the S is scribing, so writing, A for affirmations, V for visualization, E for exercise, R for reading, and S for silence or meditation. So it's just, again, systematizing, creating a ritual that works for you, that primes your performance. And these are things that you can do in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, to make sure that you're doing everything possible to set yourself up for success. So these are just some of the examples of most common themes. And I actually spent some time, great, there's a dump truck backing up and my patio doors are open, so sorry about that. So these are things that I have found in reading lots of articles and, you know, listening to podcasts on high achievers and things like that. So creating rituals, here's some ideas for you. More in the morning, one of the things that I've just started to do really frequently is setting an intention. So my first question when I wake up in the morning to myself is, how do I want to feel today? And so maybe today I want to feel joyful. Okay, great. If I want to feel joyful today, what am I going to do to create that joy? How am I going to bring that joy to other people? You know, what am I going to do to sort of create an environment that's conducive of joy? So thinking every day, and again, being really intentional and creating the life that you want, as opposed to just reacting to, you know, what you're given. I think that for me also has been tremendously powerful in listening to things that are motivational in the morning. I used to wake up and I used to call people first thing in the morning when I was walking the dogs. And then I realized that that really sapped my enthusiasm, because if I called the wrong person or had the wrong conversation first thing in the morning, that really set the tone for the rest of my day. So now I really protect my morning. I have a particular author who does a Facebook morning show Monday through Friday for just like 20 or 30 minutes. And so that's a couple time zones ahead. So I listen to that while I'm walking the dogs, and then I put on a podcast while I'm getting ready in the morning. And having that consistent structure, consuming that content that is motivational, uplifting, really starts my day in the right way. Getting moving, I think, is crucial as well. And sometimes you can kill two birds with one stone. You can listen to that uplifting media while you're walking. It's great if you have dogs. If you don't have dogs, put a walk in your calendar and set an alarm for it, and make sure that you go outside. So many different reasons why this is valuable. So I don't need to spend time with that. Affirmations, I actually spend like 2 seconds every day thinking of 3 affirmations and writing them in my planner. And I can tell you actually what today's are, so you can see sort of what I do. So I am confident, I am strong, I am guided. Those are the 3 for today. And it's whatever pops into my head. And sometimes you'll see there's certain ones over and over and over. But it's, what do I need to know or need to feel today? Those tend to be what my affirmations are about. I try as much as possible to automate my decisions in the morning, so I don't have to waste decisions on things that are silly. To me, silly things are like, what am I going to wear today? Other people, that's like a very important question, and they want to spend decisions on that. But there's this idea of decision fatigue, that the more decisions that you make in a day, the quality of your decisions go down exponentially. So if I can automate, like, what am I going to have for breakfast? I have the same thing for breakfast every single day. I do things in the same order, so I don't have to think about them. So then it's not a decision, it's a habit. And then the 3 mini days I talked about. I do think it's great if you want to try this concept. Bite off a small amount. Don't jump in the deep end with the 6 to 12, 12 to 6, 6 to 12. You know, try what I did. Try maybe 3 4-hour days or 3 3-hour days and see how you do. In the afternoon, as I mentioned, lunch away from your desk, super important. Find a new space to eat lunch. You can then review what's happened so far in the day and recalibrate if you need to change maybe your top 3, or you need to change the plan. Again, get moving, get some sunlight, go outside. And at night, this idea of a shutdown process, I think, is really important. So maybe writing down the top 3 things that you have, your big 3, and figuring out what routine makes sense for you from a going to bed and a wake up standpoint. So there are there are 3 different sleep profiles, or maybe 5, depending on who you read. The big ones are that you're an early bird, an intermediary, or a night owl. There are some, you know, sort of deviations. If it's 5, it's like you're sort of an early bird or you're sort of a night owl. Most people are intermediaries, but if you're a night owl or an early bird, don't try to change yourself. Try to build your schedule around what naturally works for your own unique rhythms. And at night, for me, again, spending time with gratitude, spending time on what I accomplished that day makes me feel really good and really powerful and in control, you know, for the next day. So James, I see, is totally guilty of not leaving his desk to eat. I am the same. I struggle with this one so much. And it's a good reminder for me to tell myself, because I'm definitely not perfect at it, but it makes a huge difference when I don't. So questions about any of that? Rituals? No? Okay, cool. So I'm gonna hop right into energy. Energy is the last thing that we're gonna talk about. I want you to think about energy differently. I think people think about energy and they're like, oh, I'm either tired or I'm energetic, and that's it. It's just a physiological response. I like to think it's related to sort of stamina in a couple different areas. One, physical, of course, physiologically, how are we feeling in our bodies? But mental, like, you know, one of the things that I do every single day that is a boosting sort of mental task is to do the New York Times mini crossword, which is free if you subscribe to their website. So I think that, you know, mental energy, you've all sat probably in front of a spreadsheet for hours and hours and hours and just felt all of the life force sucked out of you. So you know that mental energy is a real thing. Emotional, how we're feeling, obviously that can be positive or negative. And then spiritually, like how are we connected to something greater than ourselves? And this doesn't mean, you know, it doesn't necessarily have to be a God thing. I think a lot of people are really sensitive to that. But how are you connected to sort of the greater world that's out there, or to the planet, or to your neighbors? All of those sorts of things to me are sort of, you know, spiritual energy. So here's some different things that I think you should consider. Leverage points are, you know, how can you improve essentially your energy in these areas? Physical, really obvious: exercise, sleep, nutrition, hydration, making good choices, maybe not drinking so much during this time, which sometimes is a challenge. One of the things that I would recommend doing, and this is something that I'm implementing right now, is setting a timer on my phone. And this is totally crazy because I could work for hours and hours and hours, but top performers tend to, and this was a study, I think this was part of Brendan Burchard's high performance habits study, that top performers tend to take a 10-minute break every 50 minutes. So try that. Just try that for one day. See how it works for you. In that 10-minute break, what I would suggest, one of the things that I like doing is yoga flows, especially if I'm getting tired. For whatever reason, inversion, like if you do downward dog, all the blood rushes to your head and that usually wakes you up. So that's something that I do. There's an author that I follow that in quarantine has been doing push-ups every time they go to the bathroom. And I think it's like 10 or 20 push-ups every single time. And so if you can imagine like how quickly that could have a really positive impact on your physiology. So whatever works best for you. I would suggest though trying that 10-minute break every 50 minutes and seeing how that works for you. Mental leverage point is to make a list. Like, what are the tasks that you're doing on a daily basis that either drain you or energize you? So for me, I know I talked about the New York Times mini crossword puzzle. I just love that. I don't know why. It only takes like, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes. Sometimes if I'm really good, it only takes a minute. I cannot do the full New York Times crossword puzzle. I am definitely not that smart. But that's a fun little thing that gives me energy. And sometimes if I know I'm going to have a tough day, I'll save it for the end of the day as a reward. Try alternating. Like if you know you just have to sit, like I know Shannon works in benefits and probably spends a lot of her life in spreadsheets. And I know I'm oversimplifying your job to just benefits. I know it's much, much more than that. But if she knows that she's going to have, you know, a lot of spreadsheets to review or a lot of work that she finds mentally taxing and draining, it's probably best if she sort of shuffles up her tasks or works for an hour on something that's mentally draining, or 50 minutes, right? And then a 10-minute break. And then she moves into something that maybe is going to give her a little boost. That is going to help her from a performance standpoint, from a mental acuity standpoint, just to feel that much more energized. Emotionally, I like to create a list of things, a joy list, essentially, like at its simplest sort of term. What are the things that really help pick me up? And this is sort of the list that I use for self-care as well. Like if I'm having a tough day, what are the things that just like instantly like bring me back to a happy place? So some of them are really, really simple things. Like I really love a great cup of coffee. I really love, you know, a hot cup of tea. Like those sorts of things for me can be really uplifting and recentering in the middle of the day, and creating sort of a, you know, 5 or 10 minute little coffee break or tea break for yourself can be helpful. But spend time today creating a list of all of the little things that you can do that can bring you joy. One thing to try today, I think music has so much power, not for everyone. Not everybody's a music person. I'm a music person. So what can you do to create maybe a playlist of your favorite songs? Maybe it's songs that represent individual important times in your life. Like James, maybe it's a song from when you met your wife, or a song that one of your kids loved. you know, whatever you can do to create something that just is uplifting and is a positive sort of break for you throughout the day. What I like to do, this is maybe not the most mature thing. I love memes. And so if I'm having a really tough day, sometimes I'm just like, you know what, I'm going to give myself 10 minutes. I'm going to look at my favorite meme accounts and I'm going to laugh, and that's going to put me in a better state. And then I'm going to be ready to sort of take on the world after that. Spiritual, the leverage point there for me is to connect to my greater why behind what I'm doing. This has been like really crucial for me during this time, because it's been interesting to go from startup to having a successful business to all of a sudden having almost everything that I was working on. I do have a few clients who are still hiring, so it's not everything, but a massive sort of pause was put on a lot of the work that I had done and a lot of the momentum that I had built over the last year. And so for me, one of the things that has really helped me in this season to feel powerful and aligned with sort of a greater purpose is to think about how I can show up on a daily basis and really help people. And so that's a part of today for me. Like, this is something, these are things that I have learned that have helped me, that I have implemented, that I'm exploring right now. And so for me, this is very much a flow sort of experience. I think if we can identify the times where we feel really like in alignment with our purpose and like we're in the flow and we're doing the things that we're meant to do in life, those are going to be energizing experiences for us. And again, they're going to sort of reinforce, you know, the values that we have as people. So one of the things that I enjoy, I have on my sort of weekly goal list is to, on a daily basis, seek out different ways that I can help people and inspire people. So maybe for you, you know, I know James is really involved in his church community. I know, you know, some others are really involved, you know, with kids' schools and things like that, or with other communities, like volunteer communities. I know Shannon is a huge volunteer. So think about what you can do, where you're at, and how you can sort of create energy for yourself in the space of maybe spirituality and community. All right, so that is the end of everything I prepared for you on more mindset, order, ritual, and energy. These are some of the things that I'm working on. Just so you know, I'm working on a 6-week group performance program. This is, you know, sort of the first step in that, because I think some of these things I talked about today are really the basis for any sort of forward momentum, is getting the James Ward, the basic blocking and tackling, you know, your foundation built before you maybe go after some of these higher level goals. I'm doing one-on-one coaching. I'm working on a membership platform, and I have a podcast in the works, which I'm really excited about, that is going to come in June. So if you have any questions about that, definitely let me know. I have all of this information too in the resource guide, which I'll send to you after the fact. And questions. So if there are any questions, I would love it if you would follow me and my company on Twitter. If you have any questions, I see a couple things in the chat that I want to share. Great Ed Milet advice from James Ward. Don't touch your phone for the first 15 minutes of the day. I love this advice. I'm so glad that you're saying this. So James says, picking up your phone puts you on defense right away because of work, news, family drama, etc. Take the first 15 minutes to do your gratitude, go on the offense, and then pick up your phone to start tackling the day. 1000%. I could not agree with you more. And the only thing I would add to that is that around 2016, during the election, I found myself really, really sucked into the news cycle. I would watch the news first thing in the morning. I'd literally turn it on and it would be on until I left. And then I would listen in the car, and then all day long on my phone, I had news alerts popping up. I realized that every time I was doing that, every time an alert popped up, I had this sense of dread, like, what, oh my God, what's happened? What, you know, maybe terrible event has happened. Silencing those news alerts, getting rid of DirecTV, which to a lot of people might sound crazy, has done more to help my mental health than probably anything else. And I totally agree. I totally agree with Ed Milet, totally agree with James. you want to invest in yourself first before you allow yourself to be drained by other sort of people, situation, scenario. So great point. Shannon says, thank you, Allison. The content was well organized, highly valuable and actionable. Copy the slides. Yes, I have a resource guide that has most of the information from the slides and actually has more than that. So I will send that to everybody who attended. Again, I really appreciate the time that you guys spent with me today. It was super fun to do this. If you have additional questions, if there are other topics that you want to see, I would love your feedback. And again, really appreciate the time. So thanks so much.